I'm Matt Kowal. I'm an artist and technologist living between Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. I very much feel like a digital native. I mean, spending as much time with backlit screens or projections as with printed media, or again biasing towards the digital, like away from keyboard experiences, AFK. I'm interested in kind of splitting the meaning of O world and the world. The former just referencing more of the like infinite number of local times, the countless centers, and a networked center that can be everywhere and nowhere. I think you can see some of that in the current iteration of our piece. Our collaborative work is inspired in part by the perceived continuity of lived time and the granularity of recorded time, the representation of celestial events, and this tooling of translative technologies.
So to introduce the project that is downstairs in the Air Gallery space, and if you haven't had it, we'd love to invite you to have take some time to spend with it. It really rewards quiet and endurance and patience. So the project and our collaboration kind of began, or we like to tell a story that began in 2021 in the summer when we went to watch the solstice at the sun tunnels, which is just a couple hours west of here. You might have heard of Nancy Holt's land art piece. And that was maybe the first time that we connected through an experience that was related to cosmos, sun, sunrise, sunset, but had been friends before that. And then shortly after that, we began capturing sunsets and sunrises through webcams, individual webcams, just kind of screenshotting them as we went. And then we started working together to script that capture, to automate it, so that it would do it for us. And then we reformatted and have since been reformatting those screenshots into these live video installations, which is kind of culminates in the piece we have here. And for each piece, we're choosing the webcams that we're sourcing. Initially, those were chosen for personal interest and engagement and for our own relationships. And now we're choosing them in relationship to cosmic events, so like has astronomical events, the sunrise and sunset in different locations. Yeah, Matt will tell you.
Yeah. So for the current exhibition here at UMOCA, the imagery is presented as a projected panoramic with a gradient naturally forming between a progression of sunrises and sunsets. The cadence of the image feed is delineated by the granularity of each camera's operations. So we're sourcing publicly available webcams from to represent all of the Earth's 24 UTC time zones. And then we just crop those to just the image of the sky. And then these are then slightly overlapped to create the seamless panorama that's in the gallery space now. And all this is done programmatically with an array of scripts that fetch and process the image before they're then served locally to the projectors. There's also an audio component featuring a list of poetic questions read aloud by community members from Ogden, field recordings featuring rain, footsteps, wind, birds, and a tonal field referencing a low frequency hum of the earth. The piece kind of functions as a clock, revealing time through the distant light, as much as a piece of like a very slow, deliberate cinema, because it is constantly updating 24/7. It's very much a live piece that reveals the same aspects of like this network translative technologies that we're interested in. And it's projecting a meta-narrative of cinema as well, as referenced by art critic John Berger, by displacing and transporting while also collecting and bringing home.
We were really interested in having this dialogue because we see it as an extension of our own research practice. So oftentimes in these panels, we would be on the panel, but we want to ask the questions because we're the ones who are curious, and we're interested in drawing from all different disciplines in our own research and our lived experiences, and we're going to invite our panelists to share from both as well. So yeah, physics, photography, my own meditative practice, time spent living outside. We really value the breadth of experience and are interested in pulling from all of these. And we also see our practice as an exchange in the way that collaboration has come into play in both of our practices. So that like initial exchange of conversation happening between us, we wanted to extend here and then extend to you all throughout the evening.
Yeah, I think part of what interests us about this piece and previous iterations is in kind of grounding people where they are, in providing opportunity to call attention to like the things that surround us, things that are happening around us, but they're often too overwhelming or just mundane for us to see. So instead of like taking you outside and saying, that's the sun, you know, that's the clouds, listen to the wind, or this is the sunset coming on, instead let's come inside, you know, let's look at these things as an image, and let's listen. And I think that gives the viewer the ability to take a step back from their ordinary expectations of how the world works and enter into this alternative image space that an art space provides, you know, to know the world outside of you and have appreciation for it, but to do so in a way that isn't direct or ordinary, you know, to play with, and that plays with the idea of something pedestrian or mundane, allows you to think about light or time differently, think about how it works, wonder, you know, what is my relationship to these things, what's really happening around me all the time, and, you know, how can I take this experience that's happening in a very controlled art space and find it in my home or find it on my walks or, you know, while sitting outside.
Without further ado, we'd like to introduce our panelists, starting with First Officer Fiona Morrison, this is not in sequential order here, who is an airline transport pilot with over 3,500 flight hours and 7 years of experience after pursuing in aviation as a second career. She holds certifications as a certified flight instructor, CFII, both, and a multi-engine instructor, along with a Gold Seal instructor designation. She's passionate about training and mentoring pilots at every stage of their flying. Thanks for joining us, Fiona.
Next to me is Dr. Daniel Mendoza, who holds joint appointments as Research Associate Professor in the Department of Atmospheric Sciences and Adjunct Associate Professor in the Pulmonary Division of the School of Medicine and the Department of City and Metropolitan Planning at the University of Utah. He quantifies the health effects of acute and chronic pollutant exposure. He's the director of the Dark Sky Studies minor, and the instructor of the capstone class at the University of Utah.
And to the left of Fiona is Georgie Corkery, who is an ecologist and is currently the coordinator of the Great Salt Lake Institute at Westminster University and president of the Great Salt Lake Audubon. Georgie holds a bachelor's in environmental science and sustainability studies and urban ecology from the University of Utah, and a master's in ecology from Utah State University, and she works in nonprofit sector, K-12 education, and conducts ecology research.
You said it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, nailed it.
And finally, we have Edward Bateman, who is an artist, University of Utah professor, and fellow at the Royal Geographical Society. He's been included in international collections and textbooks, and his work has been exhibited in over 28 countries, and he has twice been awarded in 2018 and 2021 at the Earth Photo Exhibition in London.
Welcome, thanks. We've outlined a number of questions that we think will help guide us through the conversation, but we're really hoping for an open dialogue, and the last time most of this crew met, it was obvious that was going to be a great success. So we'd love to invite you all to respond to each other and to ask questions as we go. And if needed, we'll steer the way. We would like to start with this question about what your relationship is to light and how you see that relationship connecting to the daily passage of time. Anyone's welcome to start.
I thought I was going this way, but you know. Is this okay? So as you probably heard just now, one of my primary occupations is the director of the minor in dark sky studies at the University of Utah. So light is very important to us. For those of you who might not know about the minor in dark sky studies, it is the only and first academic program looking at light pollution in a holistic way. For example, there are many other fields that look at it in many different ways. So, for example, conservation ecologists look at it in terms of what is the impact on birds, insects, mammals, trees, for example. City planners look at it. What is appropriate lighting? Anyone who's designing lights, such as LEDs, so for example, electrical engineers or whoever does design of the light. Cultural anthropologists look at it. How did cultures navigate? What do constellations mean to different cultures? So the studies really have been there. That's why it's dark sky studies. It's not dark sky study, because there are many ways to approach light pollution. Astronomers look at it as well because they're very interested in looking at our past. If you think about anything that we're seeing, even what you're seeing as me right now is actually the past. And when we look at the stars, it could be millions of years in the past. So what this minor does, and we're hoping to grow into a major, we just had our largest graduating class from the minor. So I taught the capstone course, 18 students, and we did 3 projects, one looking at the impact of light pollution on the Olympic Games that we're going to be having, because you know the athletes do sleep in the Olympic Village there at the University of Utah, which are the dorms, and many students have complained about light intruding. So if you don't have blackout curtains, for example, you've got a street light, and you maybe miss a few minutes of sleep. For these athletes, it could be a millisecond, which would be podium or nothing. The other group worked with the Tracy Aviary, looking at Salt Lake Avian Collision Survey, looking at what dead and stunned birds during migration season in the downtown area. They do a survey. And then the other group looked at appropriate lighting at parks. Could people feel safe in parks? Do you feel safe walking the dogs, not tripping over some hazard? So we want to make it very applied. And so this, to me, really is looking at light from all these sorts of angles. And I want to also especially thank Charlie Warner, who's a professor in Westminster, who introduced me to Matt and Ariel. She worked with us as a TEDx instructor. I gave a TEDx talk on light pollution, because I want to make sure that everyone really sees all this impacts, because it is so multidisciplinary that no matter what your interest is, whether you're an artist, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a planner, there is something there for you that you could feel passionate about in terms of light pollution and light exposure.
Okay, so kind of piggyback off of that and light pollution, like you heard, I fly airplanes. I fly the Airbus 220, and my relationship with light and the passage of time is I'll take off in the morning and watch the sunrise, and if depending on the direction we're going, I can watch the sunrise the entire flight. And the time will be changing, but we will go off of universal time, UTC, and we can see how, at a higher perspective, at the higher altitude, you get to watch sunrises and sunsets for a lot longer. And at nighttime, same thing, light pollution, right? In the flight deck, we do fly, most of us fly with the light on, the overhead light on at night, just so we can stay alert, stay awake, of course. But you can turn that off, and you can dim everything down, and you can see the stars, and that's a super unique perspective that I know that I'm lucky to have, that there's no clouds, there's nothing blocking between us and the stars, and we're the highest ones up there most of the time. Maybe a plane or two will be coming by, but you can make it incredibly dark up there. You turn off all the lights and just look up and see the stars, and I think that I sometimes can take that for granted, but I do pull out, I have my little iPad that has a little app with the star scan, and I can see the stars, and I can see what's going on, and some are brighter other days than not, and maybe to the captain I'm flying with their dismay, I like to read about them. I'm like, oh look, that's, the moon's in this phase, and I read all about it, and they're not as interested as I might be, but I try to, be like, come on, this is cool. This is something that we have a very unique perspective on and seeing, and so, it's an interesting thing with time passing, because I'll take off in one time zone, kind of, what your art piece and installation is doing is you're seeing every single time, every hour of the universal time, and so I will land and it'll be, 3 hours earlier than when I actually took off, but I can also see the passage of time and use light to kind of see where time is passing, even though the clock might not necessarily be the exact same. So it's kind of a unique perspective, but again, we do get to see some really pretty night sky and kind of reduce all that light pollution as well.
I think in my research I was looking for which airplane that I could rent and how much it would cost, so I could always see the sunset or sunrise. It's like the military owns one, maybe.
Yeah.
I can't afford it. The grant didn't cover it.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah. It only coincidentally happens, and it's always like when I'm like a little upset to wake up that early, but when I get up there and I see the sunrise, I'm like, oh my gosh, we get to watch this for a very long time, and like in and out of the clouds, and only things that people wish they could like see or photograph, and that's something that I know I definitely take for granted some days, but on the days where it's a really beautiful sunrise, I'm like, this is really special and this is really unique, and I'm gonna sit here and enjoy this whole beauty of the sun rising.
Well, I'm jealous, and if you ever need a buddy to go with you, not that I think I can, but put my name in the pot. So I have, I think, a really dynamic relationship with light, personally and professionally. So I'm an ecologist, and then I'm also working with the local Audubon chapter. So all about birds, if you don't know what National Audubon is. So I'll start with being an ecologist. I go out in the field a lot, specifically to Great Salt Lake. And something that you probably know about Great Salt Lake, and we're thinking about light, we're thinking about daylight right now, is we're struggling with dust, right? That's what you see in the news mostly about Great Salt Lake, is like this toxic dust coming right for you. And it's scary, and thinking about going in the field this week and last week and next week, I'm sending students and people out into the field for all sorts of projects. And like yesterday, there was a lot of wind, and thinking about their health and not only visibility in the valley, but it does impact us. And when it's a hot day but there's dust, there's a feeling that comes with that when you're in the valley that doesn't feel good, let alone thinking about what's happening to your lungs. So that's one part of being an ecologist, a field ecologist. And then thinking about the birds, right? And light pollution. I think about light pollution personally all the time. But for these birds, we have, I just checked, because it's migration season right now, there was like 18 billion birds in the United States migrating. That was at 4 o'clock. And that number is just gonna go up, I just checked. But most birds, 80% of birds, migrate at night. And so when there is light pollution coming from these cities, they can get really confused and disoriented, and they're attracted to light, and then they crash into windows. And there's a study that was released in 2024 that shows that in the United States, about over 1 billion birds die every year from colliding into windows, which is a really big number. And that usually happens at night. These surveys that are done by Tracy Aviary that you've mentioned, they happen in the morning, like as the sun is rising. And they'll go around and they'll see all these birds that have collided into windows. So that's something I think a lot about. But then personally, and I'll try to keep this short, I had lived in Logan to go to my master's, and I used to be really afraid of the dark. And then when I moved there and it was dark at night and I'd walk around all the time, I really loved it. And I moved back to Salt Lake City, and even walking around, like in the avenues, there's a cemetery. I get so bothered, and I shouldn't be this bothered, I should like let it chill. But the stadium lights from the University of Utah are glaring at me, and I know where there's this owl nest, and yeah, so I have all these complex feelings, and I wish we could reduce light pollution and then reduce the pollution that we have during the day, which is dust, not just from Great Salt Lake, mind you, but from all the mines around us.
Totally agree. Speaking of birds, I am a night owl. My primary medium as an artist is photography, quite literally writing with light. And everything about photography fascinates me, including light and its nature, its physics. The history of our engagement with light goes back millennia, and it's so intriguing in so many ways. My medium would not exist without light. I'm fascinated by color, and color's origins begin with light. But the further you dig into everything, in some ways the more elegant it becomes, but also the more complex. I sometimes say, in order to see color, you need two things, light and a brain. And really, light is optional. all of this is connected through our own psychology, which is mind-blowing, and neuroscience. So if it has to do with light, and photography, and the history of all of that, I'm totally fascinated by it. That's why I stay up too late to some
Okay, so for our next question, it's kind of what factors, some of you kind of led into this a little bit, what factors affect your ability to feel either a sense of connectedness or continuity to like the sky or to the cosmos or to what's going on? I mean, perhaps like to view the Earth or view like your local environment, as less as a collection of like disparate things and more as like that continuity or like the unity between things, as a whole.
I've got a microphone. I mean, I'm going to tie this into your artwork because one of the things I find most fascinating about it is it connects to the long history of us. The sky was our first calendar, our first clock. And if you think about it, the world is really pretty chaotic. And if you go back to, Paleolithic, Neolithic, those times, the regularity of the sky, the moon, the sun rising, was probably a key source of order. That was one of the first things we sort of noticed. And the dividing line between art at that time, there really was no dividing line. It really took until the 19th century before we started to split off art and science. And I just see so much of the history of what you were making and what you've made that way. And I could elaborate, but I don't want to take up too much time, so you could ask me about that more. That I'm fascinated by this history with your work being sort of a landing point from millennia of what we do as humans.
I think I would need you to restate the question.
Remember anymore.
What factors affect your ability to feel like a sense of connectedness, or whether it's the, I guess sorry, initially I think of 202 is whether like, sometimes if you're at a plane and you have this very privileged view of things. I mean, and how one city looks like the next city kind of when you're up there, I guess, or things are you see like a unity, and like it's not like astronauts speak to this something called like the overview effect. Like dozens of astronauts have referenced that, where it's you're looking down, you see the Earth as a whole unity of things instead of like a bunch of disparate places. We're very like state-like and very like to separate things and divide things.
Yeah. So I think I go back and forth with both of that. I think I do feel a sense of connectedness as well as disconnectedness. When I'm flying, again, I try to have an awareness of what I'm doing is uniquely special, right? Like we get into the routine of it all, and you're doing the same job over and over, and that's the point, right? We're very routine. We have the same flows. We have the same practices in everything we do, and I have to remind myself to take a step back and be like, oh, you're flying a jet at 36,000 feet. Like, this is a crazy experience, right? And so to get away from the routine is like kind of the first step, and then to have the sense of disconnectedness. Again, like you said, we're flying over cities. A lot of cities all look the same, and sometimes when I do kind of get more wrapped up in like the person next to me, what we're talking about, I do feel a disconnectedness from the earth and the ground and kind of what we're doing and people as a whole. But when I do kind of take a step back and think about what I'm doing, there's 136 people on the plane with me. There's the captain, there's the flight attendants. We're doing this thing that hasn't been around for very long, and people are getting their snacks and getting their drinks, and we're all just going to wherever we're going. And I think that part of it makes me feel a lot more sense of connectedness, that I'm taking people, connecting people to where they're going and their family and their places. And so I feel connected as us in the airplane. And not necessarily to the people on the ground, but I do feel when we're at like a lower level, and I know that this is something that might come up later as well, but like at the lower level, and when we're kind of seeing things at 10,000 feet or lower, I can see in people's backyards. I can see people driving. I can see people walking on the road, and I'm like, oh, there's people. This is a human experience. I can see people down there doing certain things, and that has been a sense of disconnectedness as I've flown jets. When I started flying, I had to fly little airplanes to build my flight time, and I was instructing students in the small airplanes. And over in Ogden, I did a lot of my flight training, and I felt a lot more sense of closeness to the people there and the connectedness to what I was doing. And then as I get to the higher altitudes, into the jets, you're going faster and higher, and you do get a lot, the higher overview. And I do feel a sense of, okay, I'm taking a step back and things aren't as, connected as they were. And in a weird way, it's making the world seem a little bit smaller, even though I'm traveling a lot more places, right? I'm going places regularly that I don't normally go to. Like tomorrow night, I'm going to Milwaukee, and then I'll be in New York in a couple of days. And it's like, that's not something that's regular for me, but being so far removed and going fast and at a higher altitude, cities and the world becomes a lot smaller. And that's kind of one of the reasons that I don't fly international at the moment. They're playing smaller, it's just in the US. And I'm like, oh, I feel like once I go international, I'm gonna be like, yeah, I've done that. I've done those cities. And when I fly as a passenger and for personal travel, and I go on a trip in international, it's still a sense of awe, and I'm so excited. And versus when I fly into a city, I know a lot more what's going on. I know the directions. I know what the city looks like. I know the airport layout and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a complicated relationship of connectedness and disconnectedness.
And maybe for Georgie and Daniel, the what we're trying to get at here is what factors affect your ability to feel connected, whether that's like to cosmos or to spirituality, to other ecosystems, or as feel connected to the ecosystem that you're a part of, or to communities that we're a part of. So I think that's kind of where the question is.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So I think my favorite sort of unifying events are natural events. And when I say that, we can compare that to the Kilby Block Party that's coming up, right? All of these people are going, and in a way they're unified because they're watching Patagonia or Lord or you name it. But when there's a supermoon, or when there's, if people are seeing the northern lights, or even just a full moon. When I was little, I'd always go outside and look at the moon. I'd be like, oh, I wonder if my best friend's looking at the moon, thinking about how we're connected in that way. And even in my neighborhood, walking around, sometimes when the sun sets out, everybody gets in the street and we're all looking at the sunset. So as an ecologist, and I get to go out in the field, there's one location at Great Salt Lake called Sunset Beach. If you haven't been during a sunset on a cloudy day, you're missing out because it's absolutely beautiful. And Great Salt Lake specifically is a good spot for this because of this high salinity of the lake makes it really reflective. And so if you have these pink clouds, it almost looks seamless. It's beautiful. So things like that really make me feel connected, at least to the other people who are watching, even if they're like my really loud frat boy neighbors who I don't particularly feel a lot of fondness for, but like we're all connected to in that moment. And additionally, I think the moments where we are disconnected is sometimes when we're in the city and we can't see the stars. We're not connected to the other people looking at the stars because none of us can see them. So that's just some food for thought. Maybe that's a good segue to dark skies.
So I was actually thinking about this a little bit, and before I bore you with the 4 kind of levels where I think about this, just following up on Georgie's idea about a communal event that deals with the sky. 2 years ago, the Utah State Fair, I'm a big fan of fairs. I actually was a carny for a summer, so I like going all over the place, and so now I have the Utah State Fair that I go to. John Fogerty came, and he was the main act. Hopefully I hear some voices, and hopefully you also enjoyed it. But if you remember, that was actually the day when we had the worst air quality in the world. There were 4 wildfires, and as he was starting Bad Moon Rising, the moon was actually coming up, and it was actually red because of the pollution. People were some of them were looking at it or not, but yeah, that was sort of a communal event, which really ties into my 4th level. But let's just start from the very basic. level, and I'm going to try to be as fast as possible. Apologies to all creationists here, but if we think about the origins of the universe as seen by science, the first molecules, or the first atoms, were hydrogen. That's what's going on in our sun, fusion. As soon as they fuse and become helium, we get a ray of light. That is the very origin of how light and matter. So, matter and energy. If we think about this again, now take it level 2 here, we're all made of stardust. I mean, the earth, nothing is being created in the earth. Elements cannot be created in the earth because we physically don't have the energy. The energy comes from stars collapsing, becoming supernovas, etc., heavier elements. So we all are actually made of the same basic material. So we all are connected in that sense. Level 3, at sort of the individual level. One of the greatest sort of, I would say almost like an accidental, really terrible social experiment was what happened 6 years ago during COVID, when people were isolated. And people, depending on the community you were at, there are some people who, for example, could make some connections. For example, I don't know if you've seen, but there are many videos, for example, in places like Spain, where restrictions were much tighter. So people could not just, walk around the cabin, right? And so what they did was they would play, music from a balcony, and then the neighbors would stand outside or just have that connection. But what united a lot of people was the ability to see the stars, because there was not so much activity. We saw the canals. We saw how Venice cleaned up. We saw how we had some of the best air quality, and we actually measured it in my department. One of my projects was looking at what happened to the air quality here when we had a very, very minute lockdown, which was not even a lockdown, but it was about a month and a half of restrictions. And we were told, please don't go outside, but people still did, but we still saw improvements in air quality. Well, if people are not going outside, they weren't going to restaurants, they weren't going to theaters or to bars, so lights were dimmed, and people could actually connect by looking at the stars and seeing things. So for example, back home, I'm originally from Lima, Peru, my dad said, for the first time we're seeing stars. We're a city of 14 million people, 12 million people who live in the city, and 2 million that live in the shanty towns, who literally light fires sometimes to stay warm. So all of this contributes to light pollution. So people were actually able to see this. What surprises me is that people didn't really learn from that experience, and as soon as things were reopened, we were back to the same levels of pollution. Water pollution, air pollution, light pollution. So that's sort of the individual sense. And then more in the collective sense. There have been many experiments and social experiments where students, for example, or people who were not necessarily in their best condition, were invited to go and see and do outdoor activities, not necessarily just light related, but going camping, going river rafting, mountain biking, and really being able to feel both a part of doing something together, as well as experiencing nature in a way that they may not have ever seen it. Think of many inner city youth, and there was an experiment done in New York City, and I think it was about 10 years ago, and the students said, I am seeing something that I've never seen before. I thought really my life was, from a certain avenue to a certain avenue, and that's it. But now being able to really see this in conjunction with other people. Some of my students, for example, the first time when we went to help her, that was one of the field trips that we did, and they saw the Milky Way, they actually cried. It was the first time they'd ever seen more than a handful of stars, which is what we see here. We'll at least see some stars in Salt Lake, it's great. There are many cities that have none. And this one particular student had just barely seen a couple stars in her entire life. And when we went to help her, she literally cried when she saw that. So those are, at least to me, the 4 sort of levels of connection that we have with light.
I just want to throw, since you brought up physics, I'm just going to throw in sort of a quickie thing that sort of blows my mind. It takes about 8 minutes for light to leave the sun and reach the earth. But from its perspective, it doesn't literally have a perspective, so I guess frame of reference would be the right thing. Light experiences no time. To light, its moment of emission and absorption are the same. So, and I'm blanking on his name, Stanford University physicist, says it's best to think of light not as something that moves through space-time, but light as something that's more like a bridge that connects space and time into one thing. It's, and I'll just sort of...
It's Leonard Susskind at Rose.
Leonard Susskind, yeah, who was the founder of the theoretical, physics. Anyway, thank you. So, it's the one thing in our universe that connects the past to the present, that connects distances. And it experiences none of that itself, but that's sort of the light is the unifying information source of our universe, and that sort of blows me away to think of it as more of a bridge than something that's moving through space, because that's how it experiences it.
We're knocking out our questions before we get to them.
Oh,
Which is wonderful. It's a great problem to have. Sure. Oh, this one, yeah. What is your relationship to natural phenomena like sunrises and sunsets, if you haven't already explained it, and how does it impact, or how is it impacted by your work or your life, as you'd like to respond?
So this is personally, not professionally, but I used to, when there were sunsets, feel so much dread because it was so beautiful, but it was just gonna end. So I was like somebody who couldn't live in the moment, and back then I was also really, really afraid of the dark, which changed when I started interacting with the night sky and not just urban darkness. And so thinking a lot about how that's changed, I went and I worked as a wildlife technician in Big Water, Utah, which is like really close to Page, Arizona, in the middle of nowhere. It's like a town of dirt roads, and then you go down this dirt road for 2 miles and you're in a canyon at a fish hatchery. I had a little trailer locked in with the fish hatchery. My sister said I lived in a gated community. And it was so dark at night, and I challenged myself every night to like turn off all the lights and then walk away from my trailer as far as I could. And I never really made it that far, but I think that really changed it for me, and the dread of sunsets went away. And now, because I really enjoy the dark, when I do go camping, there's no dread. I just look forward to seeing the stars. But then there's also a tradition with our family. I have family all over the world, Thailand, Mexico, the Netherlands, and whenever we visit, the tradition is, doesn't matter when you wake up or go to bed or when you're sleeping, but you have to be awake for the sunset and you have to be awake for the sunrise, so we can all watch it together. And knowing that we're all watching it at different times across the world, that's a connection for my family that I really like.
So in a couple of weeks is going back to Indiana to go to a college reunion. I'm not going to say what year. It's, but one thing that I did, and again, some of you may have been to Indiana, realize that it's really, really flat. There was actually a road that was called Sunset. I can't remember if it was Sunset Road or Sunset Lane, in just really close to campus. And I made a point of catching at least a sunrise or a sunset. That lasted probably a couple of months until, and I always lived near the equator. So I was born in Lima, Peru, as I've mentioned, and I grew up in Nairobi. So it was really a 6 to 6 cycle in general. But then when things started to get dark really early and really cold and snow, which was really almost my first experience, I kind of gave that up. But it was really nice to do that, and especially, and then when the spring came along, I restarted that, and then I, started doing, schoolwork and things like that. So I stopped doing that. But my freshman year was a really nice relationship, and now more in a professional level. For us, in terms of the minor in dark sky studies, all our classes are scheduled between 4:30 and 7:30. So that's a 3-hour block, so that we can both catch, if we are working with policymakers, for example, or people such as the Tracy Avery or groups like that, we catch a little bit of business hours. But then, especially near December, we're able to go out and see darkness. If we want to take observations, if we want to take light measurements or use the telescopes. And so then obviously daylight savings kind of throws everything off. And so that's really more of a professional relationship than with light.
I feel like I'm cutting in. I have artist friends, all across Europe, from London to Vilnius, and Mount Olympus is my mountain, and the way it looks with the light, it just amazes me. And so this is even last night. I noticed because around sunset, anything's possible with that mountain. And my view from home is pretty good, but I have to sort of go a few blocks. And in just literally 3 minutes, it can completely change how it looks. It's like, oh, I want to capture that. And by the time I get to a clear view, it's totally changed and not what I was hoping for. And just the dynamic quality of this, and knowing it's something I can share, because sunsets are this remarkable gift that we're given daily and almost never take the time to see. And as I mentioned, I've been researching color and found a way to treat 400 years of painting or more as a data source. And one thing I find really fascinating is I found from this data source, there's certain color relationships that I've seen over and over, really like 2 examples. And sunsets completely nail this color scheme, not really color scheme, this color relationship that I've seen, pretty much in the history of art. It's something that its foundation is in our brains and our minds. And the fact that, when I first decided to sort of map one and see the relationship, I should have been surprised, but it nails what our neurology likes.
This reminds me of the ecologist conversation, Robert Braiding Sweetgrass, and the author ecologist talks about the aster and the goldenrod blooming at the same time, and that these, what we would call in color theory, contrasting colors, we've come to be drawn to because they're occurring in our ecosystems, which maybe I can follow up with you, Georgie, about, well, actually, wait, let's let Fiona.
I feel like I touched on a lot of the
Okay.
sunset and sunrise stuff, and
Yeah.
the only thing I have is maybe a personal anecdote that I grew up in Park City, I grew up in Utah, and I know we have really beautiful sunsets, and that's something that I have, I lived in various states all through flight training, and I went to college back east and all these different places, and coming home and watching the sunrise in Utah I think is really special. But in the conversation of light and pollution and the air and qualities, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It was when we have fires or things, the sun is beautiful, right? The sunsets are stunning, but it's like, at what cost, right? So it's kind of an interesting dynamic where you're respecting this thing and you have this emotional response to this stunning sunset or sunrise, but at the same time, it's not necessarily from a place of beauty as well. So I find that that's kind of an interesting thing that we unfortunately have in Utah with our fires and some of our pollution in the area, but you can see some stunning sunsets, but it's not necessarily always under the best circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, whether it's, you've read, whether it's wildfires, or you mentioned diversion layers, or or dust in the air. There's lots of things that I think affect like how we're viewing the sky. Besides clouds or other, I don't know what else there. Sure that there's other things that are also like affecting our perception of that. So the next question, what kind of tools, whether they're artistic tools or research tools or like instrumentation, help you process or understand time and light, and then what do you see as the future possibilities or limitations of these tools? Again, be they research tools, instrumentation, like artistic things. Anyone wants to, feels compelled.
This might be more introductory, but this is one of the things that really fascinates me about your artwork and how it ties in to history. There's something called the camera obscura, that's been known about, for centuries. I think Plato talks about it, Leonardo. The first sort of Western scientist to sort of really try this out is usually sort of pegged as somebody, see if I can remember the name, Ibn al-Haytham in Baghdad, about 10th century, which was Science Central at the time. And so a camera obscura, which is literally Italian for dark room, they noticed that if you have a room that's been darkened, has one little tiny hole in it where the light can go through, it projects an image. The light from the outside goes through this little hole and it appears upside down on the wall opposite. And that was like total magic. And starting through then up to the 1600s, Athanasius Kircher, the Jesuits, got fascinated by light. And eventually they replaced the little pinhole with lenses. And this experience of seeing the world projected is still a mind-blowing experience. I've done it in the past few weeks. And so in some ways, I like to think you've created a global camera obscura. Normally it's just one viewpoint. You've got one that spans the globe and couldn't be done without any kind of technology. And I think about that lineage and the lineage of projection that ties in through all of that. And also the idea that you're starting with light, it's getting turned into light's cousin, electricity, along its journey, going through the internet, maybe being beamed up to a satellite or down, or maybe going through fiber optics where it's been converted to light again, back into electricity somewheres, and then it hits your projector where it's turned back into light. And so in some ways, electricity, electromagnetism are all cousins, and this whole journey through light's electromagnetism, many incarnations, and tying in with this wonder of seeing projection of the real world, that just sort of amazes me. And sort of a little, I do have a meter that I can use to very specifically measure light's color, temperature, its various properties specifically, so I can see what its spectrum looks like. So we have amazing tools now that let us see light in the way that artists in the past never would have been able to.
I can jump in thinking about tools and light practice, all those things. I'm thinking of three categories. One that Daniel can probably talk way more about is measuring light pollution at night. Great Salt Lake Audubon, we have a dark skies program, and if you're interested in volunteering and you think that's cool, they go out around Great Salt Lake and they measure light pollution in various spots. It only happens 4 times a year, but it's a really cool program. So I just have to plug that you can measure that and then use that information to inform decision makers, hopefully.
How do you measure that?
I think Daniel should answer that.
Okay, because I'm curious how you measure something like that.
I'll answer the end.
Okay, he'll answer that
Okay.
question at the end.
Thank you.
Another tool thinking about time and light, maybe less of a tool and more of a signal is birds, right? Birds migrate. It's a migratory season right now. It is the spring, and some of my friends, we always compete to see who hears or sees sandhill cranes first, because those are typically some of the first birds that come through, and then who sees or hears hummingbirds first. And I heard my first hummingbird yesterday, and I was like, hummingbird! And I startled my neighbor. But that's one thing, right? And then we also use things like eBird if you're really into birding. There's just like all sorts of tools that people can use. So that's one tool. And then going along with birds more, Birdcast. So earlier I said I checked to see how many birds were migrating. I use something called Birdcast, and that is done by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So you can look that up and just see birds migrating, especially right now. It's really cool, which is why it's really important to turn off your lights at night, your outdoor lights between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. And then the last tool, sorry, I have so many tools. Just thinking about pollution in general, specifically dust or air pollution. There's tools that you probably know about. The Division of Air Quality publishes stuff online. There's Purple Air. And now we have dust monitors. Dust particles are bigger than 2.5. They're bigger than, I think, 2.10, or they can be. And so a lot of the air quality monitors don't pick them up. They're too big. And so it's been really important to get these monitors around the state, which is just happening thanks to Dr. Kevin Perry at the University of Utah. So we can see, where dust is going, and we also know where it's coming from. So a lot of tools there, and I'm happy to talk about that after in depth. But
I just
But you
looked up
mentioned purple air. What's purple air? Or purple something? Yeah.
Purple Air, you can buy your own personal air quality monitor, put one inside your house and outside your house, and then you'll be really surprised by how your cast iron pan can make your house really, it's bad air quality, but I still use my cast iron despite that. But you can buy these monitors, and then there's a map that shows all around where you live, where what the individual air quality is at these monitors.
So is purple air especially bad air?
Purple Air is the company.
Oh, that's the company. Oh, okay.
The air is purple. I don't know what to
Okay.
tell you.
Okay. Okay. I just had to know.
I think with my job, everything I use is a tool, right? And we're flying airplanes through time and light, and I think probably the biggest tool is that we use, obviously everything, there's so much technology, there's so many different things going on in an airplane, but I think is for the lack of light when we're landing at nighttime, right? Obviously you have to have airports lit up, and I'm sure there's tons of studies with birds, and we were talking before that Salt Lake is expanding their runways, and I know they were working with local conservation, worried about the bird sanctuary in certain areas for the birds, but I think something that's super fascinating about runways, and I always kind of comment on it, and again, the captains I fly with are probably like, this girl's got a lot of thoughts about this kind of stuff, but runway lights, the way they lit up is when you're only aligned with them, are you able to see the lights kind of lit up? So if you're at a 90 degree or kind of off center from them, you won't have as strong of a light kind of impact. And so it's hard for us in the night to see airports and runways if you're not fully lined up with them. We have technology inside and out, both of the ground and in the airplanes, to kind of guide us to airports and to land in the dark, and various intensity of lights. And when you're at an untowered or an uncontrolled airport, which we go into often, I fly with Delta on the Airbus 220, like I said, and we'll go into Missoula and outside of their operating times, and so it's on us to turn up the lights so make sure you have the right intensity and make sure you can see the airport and all those different things. So, but I think it is kind of interesting that in an environment with the lack of light, we do have tools available to us, and they're also kind of conscientious of their light pollution as well, right? Of course, it's going to be a lit up area. There's going to be a lot of moving things, but again, until you kind of line up with that runway and you're fully there, then you can see those lights. But if you're kind of any off-centered of any angle, you can't see it quite as bright. So I think it's interesting that there are tools, but also there seems to be a connection with not being over, populated with that light as well.
All right, get ready to snooze. I'll try to keep it short. 3 main tools that we use to measure light pollution. One is the sky quality meter. And so what it does is it points straight up, and what it looks at is how much light pollution there is. And because there are multiple types of light pollution. So if you, for example, right now, when it gets dark, you go up to, say, the top of Ensign or any type of mountain or whatnot, you'll see this kind of glow. It's like an orb. We call that sky glow. That's because there are particles so light gets refracted and gets reflected across, and then it just becomes this dome over your area. Light trespass is, for example, the example that I brought up earlier, which is a street light going directly into your bedroom. Light clutter, and you might see this, for example, in shopping centers when there's just too many lights. You don't really need that many. So those are the 3 main types of light pollution that could really obscure your view of the stars. We do have some tools. We had, a couple of years ago, we had a drone that could also measure from above, because that's actually important, because that's the light that is going and shooting up into the sky. When we take light measurements, we take them, I always tell my students, 90-degree angle, your elbow, because that's really where you're going to be viewing, right? In terms of safety, we care about the light right here. In terms of the ecology and all these other topics, and astronomy, for example, we do care about the light that goes above our heads. And that's where the drone becomes really useful. Another tool is a luminance meter. So the luminance meter, you point directly at the light, and it's how many photons are coming out. So it could be almost the brightness of your source. Now, one of the issues that we're seeing is, and we're really seeing light history happen before our very eyes because of the advent of LEDs. LEDs typically cost about 10% as much as other forms of light, incandescent or even fluorescent lights. So what happens is that now, because it's so cheap, people overlight because it's not costing them. People would normally not overlight because it costs, and then you just say, well, we don't need that. But now it's just, and when we look at things, for example, such as billboards, you're attracted to the brightest object. So if there are 2 billboards, and if we start to count, and I challenge you to take a look at 500 and 600 South, as you're either coming in or leaving the city, essentially, each billboard is trying to be brighter than the other one because that's the one you're going to be looking at. So electronic billboards are a perfect example of light pollution. And so that would be the luminance meter, is what you're seeing. If you stare at this, don't do that. You can see it through the instrument, and it gives you a number. And then the other tool is illuminance meter. So in this case, it's how bright, for example, the ground is. This is important for safety because my students would measure, for example, around parks. Are the sidewalks properly lit? Some of the issues that happen is the albedo effect, for example, snow. You would actually get some more reflectivity, and you could cause glare as well. And among the variables that we look at outside of just the raw number, which would essentially be the photons, are things such as PAR, which is photosynthetically active radiation. So if you have something that could actually be absorbed by plants, there are many images, and take a look at Google later. There are many images. For example, there's a street light right next to a tree, and that side of the tree thinks it's still daylight, and it's all withered and dead. Simply because trees need to sleep as well, and if they're constantly being stimulated, there are so many images of that, which is shocking that people still do that, because again, that light bulb resembles the sun so much. And then light color. So many of you, and I hope that you've taken advantage of this from your phones or your devices, you have night mode, which decreases blue light. So my department in internal medicine is pulmonary and critical care and sleep. And so many times we are overly stimulated. How many times do we go to bed with our phone? I do that, so don't feel bad. And if you don't have that blue light filter, you're just kind of telling your body to wake up. And then people counteract that by taking melatonin, for example. And so you're just kind of doing the opposite things to yourself. So this is from the health perspective, is looking at what kind of radiation you're getting, not just the amount, but the type of light. And so with our sensors, we can really see, you actually get to see a profile, a spectrum from, as you know, light, our visible light starts sort of in the ultraviolet all the way to the infrared. And so we see the frequency of it. And that's how we know, for example, with the photosynthetically active radiation, plants are green because it's a light that we get to see. We see what the absorption bands are on each type of light. So if you, for example, see some of the, not necessarily very old, but older series where they're interrogating someone, it's a fluorescent light bulb and everyone looks blue, it's because that is the light that comes from those fluorescents, that's what gets reflected. So lots of tools, lots of fun stuff, but I'm done.
This is my nerd dream right here. I'm like, I need another hour or a lifetime with all of you to continue, but I just want to kind of like pull us back together and make space for any of your questions, because I know that I could stay in a rabbit hole for a long time, and I probably will. But just to kind of like pull back, we've been talking about light and time and connectedness and continuity and granularity, tools, processing things, our community understanding, our personal relationships, safety, health. But I'd love to open up space for questions from any of you before we all leave today. because we've done a lot of talking and maybe you'd like to talk.
In regards to light pollution, are there any programs or political institutions or anything that are trying to mitigate that problem? And related to that, I know that also it's getting worse, not just from the light that we're creating in cities, but also from all the satellites, Starlink and everything else, so that's totally affecting nighttime photography, all that. I'm just wondering if there's anything out there that's trying to rein it in somehow. That you're aware of.
In 2019, I think it was, Senator Vickers and Representative Handy, they passed a House concurrent resolution to encourage commercial buildings to consider essentially light pollution and dark skies. If you all, and I work with a lot of policymakers, so I'm familiar with the terminology, but a concurrent resolution essentially means it's a bill without any teeth. It's just a recommendation. So far, outside of Utah being active through multiple groups, including, for example, the Audubon Society and many other organizations that have worked, Dark Sky International, for example, based in Arizona, that have worked to certify all 5 national parks, 9 state parks, and many other locations as dark sky communities. Outside of that, there's no actual law. Now, there are other places, for example, the Czech Republic actually has light pollution laws. Our goal really is to look at light pollution as any type of pollution, but unlike water or air pollution, it could take decades to mitigate. It sounds trivial to say that we could, get rid of it with a flick of a switch or correct shielding. But again, there is also, particularly in Western culture, there's a fear of the dark. You brought this up. And that's where the boogeyman hangs out. Monsters under the bed. That's all darkness, because that has been sort of what we've been brought up with. This does not exist in many Eastern cultures. For example, something that really struck me was the Maori culture in New Zealand. They don't look at the stars and they don't say this is, for example, a North Star. Well, it'd be a Southern Cross, for example. But they actually look at the gap. The darkness between the stars is what's important to them. So I think that this whole light is good, dark is bad, that's so ingrained in our culture that makes it so difficult to push towards that. But there are many organizations, advocacy groups that are looking towards that. And I'm glad you brought up the satellite constellations, because one of the biggest problems that we see in astronomy, you may have maybe a 5-minute window to observe a specific star or nebula, and then all of a sudden the satellite train goes through, and then that night of observations is done. So that is something that is a huge concern. And I'll say one last thing. There have been many organizations that are looking at the policy aspect of this. Who owns the night sky? There are many, particularly Native American groups here in the United States, that tell stories based on the constellations. But if all of a sudden a city is built right next to it, right next to a reservation or right next to a community, and they pollute the night skies, do they have the right to do that? So who owns the night sky is a really important policy question that we've all been thinking about. And it's not so different from, for example, when we had lawsuits from neighboring states because of our power plants. So who has that control? And even right now, as we're talking about water rights, as we're seeing the declining Colorado River, who really owns it? Is it the starting point? Is it the end point? So it gets very tricky, because and one of the problems with policy is that there are no actual standards in terms of light pollution that have been accepted by any organization. So for example, we know what red air quality is. The EPA has standards for that. We know how much lead can be in our water that can be safe. There are no standards for light or sound. There are noise ordinances. You can't honk your car, for example, in the neighborhood, but it doesn't say how loud your horn can be. So light and sound pollution they haven't quite been regulated, which then makes it challenging to try to enforce anything.
I'll jump in really quick since you mentioned local nonprofit organizations trying to solve this problem. So Great Salt Lake Audubon, in collaboration with a number of other groups, including Tracy Aviary, has started what's called Bird Safe Utah. And that started as trying to prevent bird window collisions, which happens often because of light pollution in urban areas. And this Bird Safe Utah group has just expanded. We have a woman named Punita. She is just this lead volunteer. Everybody on our board is a volunteer, but she works basically 30 hours a week to meet with architects and corporations. And so the new hospital campus for the University of Utah, I think it's over somewhere up north. She's worked with them to talk about lighting at night, bird safe windows, and also native vegetation. So that, that's one example, this huge construction that's gonna happen. They are listening to us and they're interested in making it a good habitat. So if you're maybe feeling angsty about light pollution and you want to get involved, there are ways to do it, not just with us, but through the Tracy Aviary. And people are working to change, local zoning laws to reduce light pollution and things like that. So there are ways to get involved, and one individual like our Punita can really make a big difference. And I'll say, up on that little stool, there is a pamphlet for Dark Sky International, which you had mentioned, Daniel. Some fun stickers if you're a sticker person. And then stuff about bird window collisions, so information about that to make your home and your office buildings safer for birds. Thanks for letting me plug.
I do have one question about urban planning. Is there groups or any standards being formed as new buildings come online through permitting, and for the city, do they drive any kind of downlighting or building lighting codes that are being now adopted, or I don't know if anybody has any information on that?
Nothing is necessarily official, but there is more awareness about light pollution. I don't know if you're all familiar with one of our newest buildings here that has as its stop level. The issue was, let's bring, just like the Walker Center, for example, flashes red or blue depending on the weather. The idea for, and I think it's the Astor Tower, I always mix up my new building names, but the top floor was supposed to tell you the quality of air quality, essentially. So green or yellow, so very similar in concept to Walker Center. Well, that's great for air quality, really bad for light pollution. You're having an entire floor just lighting up the sky. Now, on the upside, because there's more awareness, the way that I like to discuss this is, I feel like we're almost in the 1960s, where the Clean Air Act was being discussed, right before it actually starts to get implemented. So I feel that we're in the 1960s for light pollution. So we have enough architects, enough planners that are now more aware of these issues, that are more aware of implications of light. And I'll just kind of say one thing that I think does resonate a little bit. So my PhD work was in greenhouse gas emissions. About 4 months before graduating, I realized that 50% of people did not believe in climate change. 100% of people, though, believe in lung cancer, which is why I then moved towards public health. When I started working with decision makers, stakeholders, legislators, both at the state and the federal level, I realized that 150% of people believe in the value of the dollar. So while we can't necessarily ascribe comfort or birds, I mean, how could we monetize a bird death? Is this a loss? I mean, outside of having to clean it up, for example. But if we can show, and some of the work, some of the research that I've done has been poor lighting at intersections and how that leads to worse traffic accidents, particularly for walkers, pedestrians, and cyclists. Now we're putting dollars into the equation. How overlighting is costing money, how that is increasing our usage of the energy grid, which of course there are many other sources now that are putting a strain on our electricity grid. Any of these things that we can quantify with an economic cost, and I like to also flip it and not call it cost benefit, but benefit cost. Can we start to quantify what are the psychological, societal benefits as well as the public health benefits? One of our greatest public health threats is lack of sleep. We're sleep deprived as a society, as a world, for many reasons, including things such as now you have access to everything 24/7. And so many people are simply sleep deprived, and then having a light shine through your window makes it even worse. Can we start to quantify all of that? And we are when we're looking at sleep and critical care. So that is really some of the ways that we can actually monetize that and then encourage. But to the direct answer to your question is no, there's nothing that prevents a building from being noxious.
So we're from out of town, and my partner suggested I come to this. I am very sleep deprived. I came here for a conference, the Causal Inference Conference at the Marriott, and I spent most of the conference on my computer doing work. And even though I have grass in the back of my phone, I didn't see much grass as I was here on the nature you guys are describing. And one of the things I'm trying to do is get into photography, just for the simple fact of chasing sunsets and chasing light, because I get a lot of light, but through electronics. That's how you are. One of my questions for you guys is, what are some things that a person who is constantly in front of screens or constantly chasing sunsets and sunrises and needing to get less light pollution in their life personally, what are some things they could do, some other hobbies outside of photography maybe, to increase and decrease light when necessary, to kind of experience the world a little more connected?
If you want a hobby, yeah, that is, and welcome. Welcome to Salt Lake. I'm just gonna promote birding shamelessly as a hobby. One really cool thing about birds is they're crepuscular, which means that they are most active during sunset and sunrise. That's also because that's when the bugs are hanging out. So that's a really great way to be outside and to connect with nature. And something else to think about with birding, you know, you mentioned the pandemic and more people were just experiencing nature in general. There was a study that was like, who got you into birding? And it was mostly like parents or partners or grandparents. And then when the pandemic happened, it was like, oh, I did it myself because I just sat outside and I watched the birds. You can bird anytime, anywhere. Birds are like the #1 wildlife that we always see and that always connect us to nature, and maybe squirrels. They're just everywhere if you're living in Salt Lake, those invasive fox squirrels. But yeah, I mean, just observing birds, not necessarily to know how to identify them and make a life list or use eBird or any of that stuff, but just to watch their behavior is a good way to meditate. And then if you're starting to get into it, seeing birds at sunset and sunrise, I mean, we have the greater sage grouse, and they have these leks, which is their breeding grounds. And if you go out at like 5 in the morning when the sun is rising, you'll see their dance, essentially their mating dance. And they have these crazy air sacs that are yellow that are covered in what looks like a fur coat. And they make this sound. I'm gonna try not to do it super loud in the microphone, but it's a bloop bloop. And the air sacs go. You should look them up. But there's just ways to go birding and enjoy nature and interact with time and light and meditation. And I really appreciate that birds are part of the piece. If you wait long enough, you'll see a bird that's part of the piece. So I strongly suggest birding.
Cool that you love photography. I just have to say, what's the conference you're here for, and welcome?
Causal Inference. I'm a data scientist, so like just
What was that again? It's
Causal inference. So there's correlations, but then to
Oh.
determine whether something causes another is a whole mathematical field of stuff.
Ooh, I'd love to hear more on that. Whether I could understand it be another question. I think part of it is sort of just, I mean, and one thing photography helps with is kind of get into this artist mindset of seeing how the things around you kind of affect you a little bit. I mean, one thing I'd like to do is, like if I'm at the supermarket, go to the section that has the flowers, where there's all this color, you know, like sunsets, and just see if you can feel it affecting you in some little way. Just try to absorb and just sort of move your sensitivity around to whatever little thing you actually experience and see how your full mind and body reflect that. I mean, one simple one is just feel like, you know, you'll be washing your hands in the next 12 hours or something. Just feel how that water feels moving across your hands. There's so many amazing things around us that we just, you can just go right past us. But just feeling what water feels like, you know, just try to see how these things that surround us affect you. I'll just put in a plug for that.
Thank you.
You know, I would add for photography, I mean, you can hear me anyway. You know, for photography, I mean, using a camera without you know, just in manual mode, and just getting in the habit of eventually, you can set the ISO and your shutter and aperture just by experience, by knowing that this is what the light is like right now, this is what, you know, this is the time of day, or, you know, you get very in tune with setting those, you know, just defining the light according to your settings, just based on intuition, is really, I mean, that's been something that really helped me. I mean, you know, just like back, I mean, usually like learning on an analog camera too, not a digital camera. But I mean, or shooting according like to what like your histogram looks like. You know, not you can be even divorcing that from the settings, but just looking at like what kind of output you're getting on the histogram for your colors too. I mean, just different way. I mean, just a different way, like a practice of thinking differently about how you're taking pictures. But you definitely use like a manual setting or something like that. It can make you more in tune with like the light, or make it more of a meditative process.
Your question is so beautiful, and it basically summarized the one that I wanted to ask everybody at the end, which was great, which was about daily or seasonal actions that we do that help us feel more connected. And the example that we came up with when we were writing this question was just, so last May we're here in the studio, our studio's in the basement. If I open the door, I can see the wall that lets the deflected sunlight from outside through the tiny little slit between the two buildings come in to the studio. It's really dark in there. We spend a lot of time on screens. Our whole project is web-based. So this kind of brings up a conundrum within the piece for ourselves. But one of the things that we did was just sit outside and have lunch every day. And what we started to notice, I think we brought chalk at some point, was like where the shadow of the building was on the concrete between here and the whatever the auditorium where they have all the opera is. Thank you, Ravenel. And we would be like, oh, shadow's pretty far. Looks like we waited really long to have lunch. And this was just like a really simple practice that was both sitting outside and having lunch and like looking up and also noticing the shadow. For me, was just a really like small daily act that helped me feel a little bit more connected and a little bit out of like the dayless, nightless screen world that never sleeps. But I guess I'll reflect your question back to anyone who hasn't answered that as we finish. If anyone hasn't answered, Georgie, you mentioned this beautiful practice with your family of being awake for sunrise and sunset. And Ed, you've talked a little bit about being awake at night, but if there are other daily or seasonal actions that help you commune with sky or cosmos, maybe just from Fiona and Daniel, we'll finish there.
Yeah, and I'd like to tackle the second part of your question. Your first was pick a hobby. The second one was how do you sleep better? This is really, so first of all, don't do astrophotography. I actually just met with that group yesterday, and I talked to them about the dust storm, which happened really, it was bad about 3 p.m. They're like, we're not awake yet. I was like, whoa, okay. Because they really start to move around 4 p.m. because they stay up till 6 in the morning. So astrophotography, if you want to sleep, don't do that. Then really, you already know this, sleep hygiene. I mean, just make sure you've got blackout curtains, make sure, even a digital clock. We've had students, for example, just turn off your digital clock. I mean, if you had, well, no one has VCRs anymore, but if you have a Roku box or whatever, that blinking light, believe it or not, your eyelids try laying in the middle of the sun, right, in the park or whatever, lay down. Your eyelids are pretty transparent. You will see that. Subconsciously, you'll catch that.
He tapes all of this.
Yeah, that's really good practice. Then just few screens an hour before. Read, do something that chills you out. One thing, and I think kind of going along with the whole daily habit, one of the things that I like to do, and especially this happens during the winter time when we have inversions, I live fairly close to the foothills, so I go running close to sunset. Why? Because as it gets colder, the pollution goes down, so I'm actually above the inversion. And so if you actually see, our bodies are tied, our circadian rhythms are tied to the sun. Of course, we get, sunlight, changes during the seasons, but I mean, as it gets darker, if you go out on a run during dusk, you will likely start to produce that melatonin naturally, and your body will say, oh, it's getting dark, especially if you do it during sunset, because it gets dark and your eyes will transmit the signal to your brain and say, oh, it is time to go to bed pretty soon. So that's just a couple suggestions on that. But I really actually want to hear from you, because you have to be the expert going, time zones back and forth. How do you fall asleep when your things have changed so much?
I do a lot of what you suggest. I unplug the clocks, I cover everything in hotel rooms. I always set it to a certain temperature that I can. I try to get it as set up to sleep as good as I can. I always read before I go to sleep, try to get myself calmed down and on my Kindle instead of my phone and things like that. But yeah, that's part of one of the biggest battles of my job, I would say, is I'll wake up. I've been doing really early mornings out of Kalispell, and we have a 3 a.m. van. I'm like, okay, I have a different circadian rhythm than that. I have to go to bed at 7, but can you really go to bed at 7 in a hotel? People are running around, people are on vacation. So if you ever think about slamming a door in a hotel, think there might be flight crew sleeping down the hall from you. But no, I think that they put us in good hotels, and I've gotten some really good sleep habits from that. And I know I have my little Oura ring, I track my sleep. I kind of am aware of all those things and have, like you said, good sleep hygiene. But to go back to the question and just kind of wrap it up I talked about, my interaction and my kind of day-to-day stuff you were talking about with your family of sunsets, and how I appreciate these sunsets, and something that maybe is a little stray from the day-to-day stuff, that's something that kind of touched on the connectedness and stuff that I experience is, and it happens infrequently, but if I go back and I look at my, memories of it, is that we recently, it wasn't recent, but this year we flew Salt Lake to Chicago, and it happened to be during one of those solar storms where the northern lights were there, and we got to follow the northern lights the whole way there. And a lot of times we, keep our PAs and our announcements to a minimum, especially at night. People are sleeping, right? We're watching a movie, don't want to interrupt them. But we, took the opportunity to say, hey, if you're on the left-hand side of the airplane, open up your windows and look outside, because this is unbelievable. It's so beautiful. And I've seen it twice now, kind of around the same time of year. And you can just see so much, and again, a unique opportunity to be in the darkness, above the clouds, above everything, and kind of follow these lights, and just to have it the whole time. You're just watching this show, and I think in those moments, I'm just like, it's incredible that this is my job and I get to do this, and then I get to share it with all these people in the back of the airplane, which normally we don't really have the connectedness to people in the back, other than when I have that awareness of it. And so that's kind of a practice, that if there is something unique, we are humans, right? We want to share this human experience with everyone and say, hey, go ahead and look out the window. I know you have your window closed, like, I know you're trying to sleep, but open it up. You're going to be really impressed with what we're kind of taking in up here that not everyone gets to see.
Thanks.
I want to take pictures.
Yeah, I know.
We are at the end of our time, but I would love to invite you all to connect with these folks outside of this space, and I want to thank them so much for their time and sharing all their experiences, both from trained and lived. We really appreciate it before today and now tonight, and we want to thank all of you for coming and listening and participating through your action. Our exhibition is up until June 6th, I have to say, and we're also giving a gallery talk on Thursday, June 4th at 7 p.m. So thank you for joining us. We'll invite you to stay for a short amount of time, and then we'll all go on our way and see what's happening with the real sky outside. Thanks so much.